Okay. All right, we are recording. Thank you everybody for joining us today. This is the first in this sort of revamped peer networking series. We did these events earlier this year and into this summer just as an opportunity for members of the licensed community and folks who are thinking of joining the licensed community to come and learn a little bit more about some of the laws, the rules, the regulations around the adult use cannabis marketplace, and offering a chance for folks to connect and a chance to learn as well. My name is Nellie Marvel. I am the Outreach and Education Manager here at the Cannabis Control Board. I'm joined today by Gabe Gilman, our General Counsel, and today's first meeting is about our rule amendments. We just went through a rule amendment process, and a number of things, some of them really substantial, changed in our rules. So today we'll go through some of that. The chat is open. There's a markup document that I'm going to put into the chat that you can sort of follow along with at home that shows what the old rules were and what changed in the new rules. And Gabe is going to walk through a number of those changes as well. So with that, I'm going to turn myself off here and I'm just going to hand it right over to Gabe.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us this morning. As Nellie said, the subject of today's peer networking event is the 2023 rule updates. Those changes to rules 1, 2, and 4 became effective on the 21st of October. And so what I've prepared for you is a short walkthrough that gives you kind of a high-level look at what changed, and we can discuss why. I assume everybody can see the slides here. I should be sharing. So the plan for here is we've got about an hour, a little bit less now, 45-minute walkthrough of significant amendments that we'll try to use as an instructive and educational tool. The first section won't be very interactive. I'll just try to walk you through quickly in an efficient way so that you can see what has changed. As Nellie said, the markup, the actual legal red line indicating everything that has changed, is available on the website, and I think may be available in the chat as well. So this first part may be posted online as a reference, and so for that reason, we won't have a lot of back and forth. During the chat, though, or during the early talk, if you have questions that you'd like addressed at the end, please email them to me. Don't put them in the chat, but you actually just email them to me at gabriel.gilman@vermont.gov, and I can just take them one by one, assuming that we can elbow out time at the end. And then the final quarter, we'll try to actually talk about anything that may be on your minds after we've made this reference tool for online posting. The information we're going to talk about here is informal and summary in nature. If it conflicts with a statute, rule, or published guidance, go with those. And you'll see italic type distinguishes direct quotations from the rules from characterizations of the rules. So again, my address, please make note of in case you have questions. And please consider downloading the legal red line, which will give you a letter by letter indication of everything that changed. There are some idiosyncrasies in it, but they shouldn't prevent you understanding what has changed. So brief orientation to how the rule amendment process works. Rules are created by the CCB, which is an administrative agency, of course, and they're adopted according to the Vermont Administrative Procedure Act processes. There's a notice and comment period. In this case, I think this was almost a 10-month process. The board is not free to just write rules on a blank slate. It receives a grant of specific statutory authority from the General Assembly, and it has to operate within that authority. Sometimes the General Assembly will mandate that it write rules about a particular topic. Sometimes, for example, with concentration caps, the General Assembly will specify operating requirements that our rules must conform with. So just because the board has adopted a rule doesn't always mean that the rule itself in substance is the policy preference of the board. The board has a duty to do as instructed by our duly elected representatives. So that's sort of where rulemaking is. You can sort of think of it as filling in the gaps between guardrails written by the General Assembly. So a big thank you to everyone who participated in that 10-month process that got us to where we are. We had about a year of kind of lived experience with the existing rules, and just tremendous input from everybody who, and very constructive input from everybody who took the time to follow along in the many meetings and public hearings and comment period. Each contribution really helped us to make these the best that they can be, and it was just a tremendously constructive process. Great to see. Ultimately, the final rules were reviewed by the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, and with their approval, the rules were adopted into law. With that, they attain the force of law. So they're really the source to go to, and I hope everybody in the industry will take the time actually, not just to use this summary as a substitute for reading the rules, but check them out. They're not terribly long, and the content is really important to your general operations. The rules are available on our website at the Laws and Rules page, and they took effect on the 21st of October. The first changes occur in the definitions section. The definition of employee was pulled out of the general definitions section because it was creating confusion and moved to the specific subsection to which it pertains. The definition of outdoor cultivation is important. The board amended the definition to embrace minimal artificial lighting. So you can see the language down there. Outdoor cultivation means growing cannabis in a manner that does not use artificial lighting, provided that outdoor cultivators may use the minimum amount of artificial lighting necessary to keep photoperiod plants in a vegetative state. Artificial lighting for outdoor cultivation must not extend beyond May 1st in a calendar year or past when the specific cultivar can sustain vegetative growth under natural sunlight, whichever comes first. This was a subject of attention by legislators, some concerned about light pollution and kind of excessive use of lighting. So if you're going to take advantage of that as an outdoor cultivator, we do ask that you be mindful of those limitations and really use the absolute minimum necessary. Next, definitions pertaining to social equity criteria have been clarified. One of the ways that one can qualify for social equity benefits under the relevant laws and rules is to show that the person was incarcerated for a cannabis-related offense. The board has clarified that means serving time in a jail or prison facility subsequent to sentencing for a cannabis-related offense. That does in practice is it excludes from consideration pretrial detention that has occurred and can occur for myriad reasons that are really never easy to go back and understand. Whereas a conviction for a particular offense has elements and can clearly be tied back to cannabis. So by implementing that standard, we can have improved fairness and consistency in how we're treating folks. Second, the definition of community is clarified. One of the ways to qualify for social equity designation is to be from a community that has historically and disproportionately been the target of cannabis prohibition policies, and as well as to be directly affected by the impact on that community. So community is clarified to embrace both people who were on SNAP benefits as kids for a majority of the childhood. Those used to be called food stamps. It also clarifies that for the purposes of the subsection, community doesn't mean a professional or civic association, social organization, club, advocacy organization, hobbyist group. Prior association with cannabis is not by itself sufficient to constitute a community. What that is about is that the intent of the social equity program was to remedy disadvantages that fell on people because of border-imposed circumstance. If somebody had, followed a band or something that was associated with cannabis, they might indeed encounter enhanced scrutiny by law enforcement and the unpleasant things that go along with it. But that wouldn't be the same as being from a community. The difference being sort of going to the thing rather than being from a community where those impacts were felt and somewhat beyond one's control. The applicability section recognizes the board's statutorily assigned responsibility for hemp-derived cannabinoids. This relates to and is further addressed in Rule 2.17, which is the codification of the emergency rule on hemp-derived cannabinoids. Rule 1.3.3 addresses extraction safety in the main. Extraction methods reserved for Tier 3 manufacturers must occur in a public building, one with a certificate of occupancy, and not a residence generally. Tier 2 manufacturers may not use supercritical CO2 extraction. Rule 1.3.4 is amended by way of clarification. The prior iteration could be read to suggest to the reader that you can't change tier until you're up for annual renewal. That's not the case. You can change tier by filing a renewal application at any time during the calendar. And in fact, you must change tier before substantively changing into doing the thing that is allowed by the tier that you're seeking. So don't wait for the annual renewal. If you intend to change tier, let us know immediately and file a renewal application to do that before actually taking action to change volume or whatever puts you in the new classification. Rule 1.11.3 articulates a clear standard for overcoming presumptive disqualification based on criminal history. It was a little bit unclear what standard a person would be held to when the board made an ultimate decision as to whether or not a particular criminal history prevented someone being fit for holding an employee ID card or being a principal or controller of a licensed cannabis establishment. This clarifies that the question the board will now ask is whether the person's participation in the marketplace would jeopardize the public health and safety or undermine the integrity of the legal cannabis market. Rule 1.17a recognizes that there are certain de minimis changes in ownership structure that just don't call for a full-blown renewal application and all that it entails. If there's not really a substantive change, staff would be able to alter record the new change in the license file without requiring all that would be required of a more substantive change. A change that should make a lot of folks happy is that Rule 1.4.5 no longer requires cessation of operation escrow. Until the 21st of October, every licensed establishment was required to escrow $5,000 in anticipation that they may need that money in order to wind down operations. That was not seen to be particularly beneficial, and it was seen to create a barrier to entry. And so it has been removed. That means that trustees holding those $5,000 deposits may return them to depositors. Trustees naturally are going to want some evidence that this has occurred, and so that's available in blanket on our website. We've published a memorandum that explains this change has occurred and just affirms to trustees that they are free to return those funds to depositors. Rule 1.4.5C was a little bit of a whoops. We got a little bit of ahead of ourselves because of an obscure provision in the tax title. As has been discussed a little bit in relation to the medical program, there really is a desire to improve access for medical patients. And one of the ideas expressed in 1.4.5C was a hope that one of the positive impact criteria might be a plan by retailers to pay the tax on behalf of a registered medical patient. You can still make those plans, but you cannot execute them. The tax law prohibits one from purporting to pay some of those taxes on behalf of another. So unless and until there is conforming legislation that allows that to occur, don't actually do the thing. So you might think of 1.4.5C as sort of being on ice until and unless conforming legislation makes it possible to do that without the catches that were there. So a bit of an oddity with that one, but bears mentioning. Rule 2.1.3 introduces a definition of adulterated. This is a term used commonly in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics law, and I think to a lot of people would denote in ordinary discussion poisoning or contamination or direct contamination of some kind. The legal definition of it really has come to mean that something is wrong with the product in such a way that the consumer can't be sure what's in it. And that can be as simple as a deviation or a discrepancy between the content of a container and the label. But these are the particular ways a thing can become adulterated is that it can consist in whole or in part in any filthy, putrid, decomposed substance, etc. I'll try not to read the whole thing for you, but packing problems, potential contamination, having content that falls outside established tolerances, failing to have the strength, quality, purity, ingredients, and composition represented or expected or consistent with its labeling, or that it contains any additive or substance that may increase the potency, toxicity, carcinogenicity, or addictive potential of the product, or that otherwise may present an enhanced risk to human health. So putting all those together, that more or less means something's wrong with it. But the big focus being on consumer expectations based on the label should match what is actually in the content. This is an important definition because later we'll see that there is mandatory reporting of adulterated product. So knowing what triggers that is important to folks in the industry. So please have a close look at that new definition. New definitions also appear for clone, for distillate, and for full spectrum. I won't read those ones to you, but they are new and useful, and we had some helpful input in formulating those during the public comment period as well. Harvest lot is defined, and this interacts with the changes in testing requirements. Harvest lot means cannabis grown in the same manner. To meet the criteria for a single harvest lot, a given lot of cannabis would need to be in the same flowering, fertilizer, and pesticide application schedule. A single harvest lot may contain one or multiple cultivars. So the harvest lot really cannabis grown under the same conditions. Outdoor cultivation is amended in exactly the same way that was discussed in Rule 1, so I'll omit that one. Process lot is now defined to mean whole or partial harvest lots that follow different paths to market or diverted into waste. For example, a harvest lot would be broken into two process lots if half was sold fresh frozen to a manufacturer and half was dried, cured, and sold as bulk flower to retailer. Tincture is now defined as well, and the container must not exceed 1,200 milligrams. Rule 2.2.4 is an important substantive addition and also one that I hope folks will take a really close look at both during and following this presentation. These are sort of new operating rules built around the food safety and drug safety principles. So I think they represent an important advance in the clarification of our rules around those. And in terms of the what one thing changed here, this is one to really tune into in terms of a substantive change. So all cannabis establishments should have safe and sanitary handling procedures, probably not a change. Now an express requirement to have recall procedures appropriate to ensure that adulterated or dangerous product can be called back from the point of cultivation or manufacturing. What that means really is to have a plan, and not just to have a plan about doing it, but to have a substantive chain of command if something goes wrong and there's a recall, knowing in advance and being able to show during an inspection that you have a plan in advance to notify folks that you have a way, an efficient way in a hurry in an emergency to contact everybody downstream of you who may need to be notified if something goes wrong. So that principle is sort of adopted from the pharmacy world, and a simple but really powerful way to make sure that recalls can occur in an orderly manner. We hope they're rare, and they are rare, but when they happen, it's very important for the public safety that they be able to be executed efficiently and effectively. And from the upstream point. So that expectation will be part of inspections. So please, please give some attention to that new requirement. Regular trainings are not particularly new, but part of ordinary operation, we would hope. Same for procedures. There is an express prohibition now on meat or meat products, cannabis products containing meat or meat products. Similarly, dairy products as defined in Title VI. Folks sometimes ask, cake has dairy in it. Is that a dairy product? Following the definition, it isn't. Dairy products that are modified, for example, by baking, would cease to be within the definition. But liquid milk, cheese, yogurt, that kind of thing, ice cream, are all dairy products. There's a requirement not to produce any product that requires time and temperature control for safety, meaning if it can't be safe unless refrigerated, for example, or held under very specific conditions, it, unfortunately, it wouldn't be fit for the cannabis marketplace. Provide documentation of product pH and water activity if requested by the board. Those are sort of very basic and common food safety parameters indicating the propensity of product to spoil or to develop flora. Provide documentation of process authority review for products when the board has requested that documentation. And process authority review is a third-party review of the manufacturing process aimed at maximizing the safety of that process and the stability of the and integrity of the product resulting. This can be a little bit of a challenge because the products can't be transported across state lines, but there are in-state process authority reviewers, and I believe our enforcement unit can connect you with those if you're a manufacturer who's having difficulty finding appropriate help. Immediately report to the board breaches in health, safety, and sanitary procedures that pose a risk to consumer safety. Comply with all other laws and rules, of course. And if co-located in a residence or a building outside the jurisdiction of the Division of Fire Safety, have in the area of the regulated activity at least 2 operating smoke detectors or a number of operating smoke detectors at least equal in number to operating security cameras, whichever is greater. The idea there is that there was a lot of concern seen, I think, during inspections sometimes and from the Division of Fire Safety that residential grows are kind of bringing together high use of electricity, heat, and water, often where people are living, almost by definition, where people are living. And so they may present an enhanced risk of fire in a residence, and especially outside of the jurisdiction of the folks who conventionally do something about that. So that simple requirement that there be enhanced smoke detectors available is meant to kind of mitigate those risks and address that, since the jurisdiction of the fire safety authorities is sort of out of our hands, as are their resources. But that simple step hopefully will improve the safety of some residential grows. The other simpler amendments are listed here in Rule 2.214 through 2.3.9. We now remind folks that regulatory samples may be taken for testing and that the board doesn't compensate for those samples. Needless to say, agencies are only going to take as much as is necessary to effectuate the testing. Gratuitous amounts won't be requested. Co-location, when allowed, is still allowed, but we ask that you tell us first. That's really more a clarifying amendment. Rule 2.2.19 calls for mandatory reporting of adulterated product and offers a process for remediation of certain adulterants. This goes back to the definition of adulteration that we had discussed earlier. Cannabis and cannabis products over limit for aspergillus must be conspicuously labeled for occupational safety reasons. The idea there being that people in the industry who may come into contact with those products are entitled to know, because some folks, of course, are at enhanced risk of if exposed. Product registration is more by way of reminder, but 2.2.21 recites the existing law that products must be licensed, which really means registered through product registration. 2.2.22, again, more clarifying than a change, allows that the board may make ad hoc security requirements when that's appropriate based on context. Rule 2.2.23 explains how the board has interpreted and applied the one location rule. Of course, a license is location specific, and your license at a particular place. Mere proximity between 2 locations doesn't make them one location. The locations cannot be separated by more than one span. The span is sort of that unit of property taxation that is familiar to most of us who pay property taxes. So when assessing whether or not 2 locations are close enough together to be considered one, they can't be separated by more than one span. 2.3.9c simply provides an avenue for folks in the industry to give competition samples. There hadn't been one, and so when there was a competition of some kind and people wanted to enter their products, there was never a clear legal path to do that. The new rule provides that. Rule 2.3.10 disallows the commingling of personal and commercial plants. I won't read that one to you. Rule 2.4 strikes photographic surveillance, by contrast with video surveillance, from the list of recognized security practices. The required security practices vary with your tier and type. So this may or may not affect you, but if you were relying for one of the required security practices upon a game camera, for example, it would be necessary to replace that with video surveillance. Rule 2.6.3, manufacturer requirements now call for the packaging to include the manufacturer's license number and the process lot number. Unspoken here is that a lot didn't change about labeling, and those of you who followed the rule amendment process may recall that there was a lot of discussion about possible changes. I think the ultimate feedback heard from industry and as well as public health folks is do it once and clearly rather than incrementally changing labeling, because the costs associated with that are not trivial. And so I think the board heard that and decided that although there is a desire to update labeling requirements, that really needs to be done in one omnibus package to minimize costs to people. Looking at Rule 2.6.4, there is now a 10% terpene cap on additives, and it's important to understand in context that that's on additives, and so it isn't particularly probable that one would exceed 10% occurring naturally in the plant without concentration. But if that happens, there is an avenue by which you can prove that up. But the presumptive cap is 10%. If additives are involved, there cannot be more than 10% terpene content. Rule 2.8.11 allows that retailers may sell clones. That recognizes the statutory change. Rule 2.9.1, which I'm sort of sliding past not because it's unimportant, but because of the level of detail involved, ushers in major testing changes organized around the harvest lot. Goes back to the definition of harvest and process lots that we discussed, and folks who are involved in testing will want to have a really clear look at those changes. Rule 2.17 is the permanent codification of what had been the board's emergency rule on synthetic and hemp-derived cannabinoids that the board had adopted in April. It is identical in every way to that emergency rule and really just puts a new number in front of it and makes it permanent, except that as part of the public comment process, we had heard a lot of feedback about sort of the paradox of disadvantaging our hemp cultivators when folks from other states and many other states could lawfully sell into the other 49, whatever they wished, or at least I shouldn't say that, sell into those of the states where those products are legal, and we'd be prohibiting the manufacturer here. So there's a safe harbor provision now that adopts an idea that came out of Colorado that the rule will not be applied to a product that is prohibited solely because its Delta-9 content exceeds the serving or package limits and not for any other reason, provided that the product is produced and transferred exclusively for export by lawful means to a state where the product lawfully may be sold to consumers. So that does create a scenario where cultivators and manufacturers could be involved in the production of products that are not legal for sale in Vermont. However, they would be allowed if federal law is compatible and if law of the receiving state is compatible to sell into states that have chosen to allow those products. Finally, Rule 4, the Compliance and Enforcement Rule, receives 2 updates, and they're short ones. There is an express prohibition on something that was already a violation. It's now expressly a Category 2 violation to alter a COA or to fail to report lost, stolen, or adulterated cannabis or cannabis products. And we now have a rule codifying an appellate process in a clear way. And it's a simple process that follows that used by other licensing authorities. These appeals, of course, are on the record based on the record created before the board. And there'd just be an exchange of 10-page briefs and 15 minutes of oral argument each, all revolving around the record created before the board. So not too bad. We came in at 33 minutes. So we now have elbowed out some time to open things up for general discussion. If you have questions in the future, the general info uh, address is ccb.info@vermont.gov. And if you have questions specific to legal issues or these rules, you can reach directly out to me at the email address and number there. And so I'll shut down the PowerPoint and maybe take a 2-minute break, and then we can come back and have some discussion. If anybody has questions, I'll also use that 2-minute break to have a look at my email and see what folks have sent, if any questions have come in. So thank you so much for your time. I'll shut down my camera and we can go off the tape, and we'll come back for Q&A in about 2 minutes.